you can log on to our website at igbattmho.org. And before we got disconnected, we were talking about, and I'll start all over again. This is an article about Joshua Mclemore. Some of you may or may not have heard about him, but his name is Joshua Mclemore. I'm reading from a U.S. Today article written by Tammy Abdallah. The article is, "A man with mental illness died after 20 days in solitary confinement. Did the jail system fail him?" The name of the article again is, "A man with mental illness died after 20 days in solitary confinement. Did the jail system fail him?" And the purpose of me reading this article and just kind of talking through it is to get us to kind of think about some things. Many times when something, we all have great ideas, and when something happens, we're really excited and we talk about it, but nothing gets done. Unfortunately, this is not the first time. Unfortunately, we have a lot of our family members, our friends, family members, our loved ones who are with a mental illness, untreated mental illness, and who wind up in jail because jail is the only place that we have for them. So I think before we automatically put all the blame on the jail system, let us not forget that the jail system was never designed for people with mental illness. It was never designed, okay? Let us not forget the police were never designed to be the first responders, if you will, or the first call, or the first people to deal with individuals, our loved ones, with severe and persistent mental illnesses. The jail and the police are the last resort, or they're the only resort. That's because other systems, other people are not stepping up or not doing what we should do. So as we demand more from our police officers, we demand more from the jail systems, I think it's important that we demand more from our politicians. We demand more from our elected officials, or that we demand more from ourselves. So let me read through this article. Again, it's called "A Man with Mental Illness Died After 20 Days in Solitary Confinement. Did the Jail System Fail Him?" And it's from usatoday.com, written by Tammy Abdollah. Okay? And it says, "When Joshua Mclemore's mother couldn't reach her son several states away in Indiana during the summer of 2021, she grew worried. Mclemore, 29, had struggled with mental health problems and drug abuse since high school and had been ultimately diagnosed with schizophrenia." And as we talk about here on the broadcast, when we talk about schizophrenia, we are talking about a severe and persistent mental illness. We're talking about a category or a class of mental illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life. And then even with medications, the individuals with severe and persistent mental illnesses may still have some symptoms, okay? So, and again, another point I want to say here, that this is not uncommon. This is very common for our loved ones or even ourselves to be diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illnesses while we're still in school, while we're still in high school, okay? So that's what happened with him. But, so he was living on his own. But what began as a welfare check on her son quickly evolved overnight from him heading to the hospital to him getting booked into jail instead, after Mclemore yanked a nurse's hair at the emergency room and the police were called. So the mom became worried. She called the police for a welfare check, and I guess the police went out. And when they went out, they took him to the emergency room where they would take him. And while he was at the emergency room, he yanked the nurse's hair, according to this, and the police were called. Let me say this. A welfare check often doesn't result in someone being taken from their home and taken to jail or to the hospital. When you get a call about someone who has an emergency, a psychiatric emergency, the police crisis team, depending on your area, will go out and assess, make some type of assessment. If it's apparent that this individual needs to be taken to the hospital or needs to be taken to the hospital, that's the first step. That's the first thing that the police will do. They will take the individual to the hospital for evaluation. That sounds like what they did. So they took him there, but while he was at the hospital, it looks like he did something in the emergency room and the police were called. So let me back up here. So it looks like there was a welfare check done, and he was at the emergency room and the police were called. So it sounds like someone else may have done the welfare check because the police were called. In any event, what usually happens, again, it just depends on your jurisdiction. If you have a loved one or yourself that you're concerned, there was somebody will go out and make an assessment, whether that's the police or if it's a crisis team. If your loved one needs to be taken or they're concerned about your loved one, they'll take him or her to the hospital. Okay? At the hospital, the doctors there will do an evaluation. Based on that evaluation, they will decide either to admit, do a 48-hour hold, 72-hour hold, or release. That's what should have happened here. But because of his he pulled the nurses here, the people at the hospital decided to call the police, which is interesting, okay, that they would call the police. Because when you're looking at someone who is in a psychotic episode, you would kind of expect some of that, but anyway, because of Mclemore's mental state, no initial hearing was held. So sometimes this does happen. You take your loved one is at the hospital, or you're at the hospital. In this case, he became pulled somebody's hair. I guess they were concerned. Somebody was afraid. They called the police. The police came out, and then when they came out, they immediately took him to jail. According to this, because of his mental state, no initial hearing was held. So again, I want to share this with you. I want to share with you what should have happened or what could have happened, so that if you ever find yourself in this situation with your loved one, somebody can begin to ask questions. Because for me, just looking at this, the fact that he went from, okay, you had someone that was, okay, they went out on a call, right, a welfare check. Whoever did the welfare check was concerned enough about his behavior, about what they saw, that they took him from his home or wherever he was and took him to the hospital, which is appropriate, because you take him to the hospital, and at the hospital, the psychiatrist or mental health clinician there makes the determination what should happen. But instead, a person was taken to the police station. The first problem that I see here is that if this person was already at the hospital, because there was a mental health welfare check, then the first stop should not have been somebody at the hospital, a psychiatrist, a clinician, a mental health person should have kind of stepped in and said, hey, you know what, this person, he was here because he has has mental health issues, mental health concerns, probably sounds like maybe some psychosis. We're going to admit him instead. Because again, if you're working with individuals who have mental illnesses or psychosis, then there are certain things you should expect. So we should expect that our clinicians, our people who are working on the ground, so to speak, with individuals who are experiencing psychotic episodes, should know that the first thing you don't do is call the police. Because what happens is when you call the police, especially for someone at the hospital, the police are automatically sometimes are going to assume certain things, right? So again, it's important, number one, to have the right people working in places. So when we talk about did the jail system fail, did the police system fail, let's start going down the line. You got the jail, you got the police. You're looking at these people here at the hospital, right? Because they should have been better trained, and I'm just going by this. They should have been better trained. If you should know, if you're dealing with someone with psychosis, that you medicate, you admit, you don't necessarily you don't call the police, is what I'm saying. So again, when we talk about who needs training, it sounds like let's add the hospital staff. Hospital staff also need training in how to deal with individuals who are living or impacted by a psychosis. And as I said before, I talked about this before, what is psychosis? What is a psychotic episode? That word just means that the person is out of touch with reality. That's what psychosis means. The person is out of touch with reality. At that moment, you may not know why. It could be a drug, it could be schizophrenia, it could be bipolar, it could be another medical condition. But we know at that particular moment that person is psychotic. So if you have a psychotic person who came into the hospital on a welfare check call, then you would assume that there is something going on with this individual. You would assume that they brought him to the hospital for an evaluation, not to be admitted into, not to go to jail. That's not how it usually works. So again, if someone was there, if you were there, you listening to my my lecture here, if you were there, you would say, no, wait a minute. Let's not call the police. He's here because he needs help. He's here because he's having a mental health crisis. Let's go ahead and either admit, let's go ahead and medicate, let's go ahead and do something, because individuals who have a psychosis or are dealing with a psychotic episode many times become afraid. They may be, they may become combative, they may become anxious, worried, but many times it's because of what's going on in the inside. Anyway, so they took him from the hospital straight to jail. They never photographed him, fingerprinted, or asked any medical conditions for new arrivals. Instead, he was taken directly to a padded cell. I'm sure, and I'm just guessing, one of the reasons why they may have done that is because the call came from the hospital. The police had a certain expectation, from the hospital. And sometimes that happens. They just assume, okay, that the people at the hospital, the doctor, nurses, they know what they're talking about. They're doing the right thing. And I'm going to tell you, there are people that are in professions that are not good people. They're not good people. They may be good at their job, but they're not good people. Okay, they are not good people. So let me just I'll leave that alone. Not saying everybody is, but as I'm going through this, I'm just thinking out loud some of the reasons why things were done the way they were. Because, again, the jail would have been, the police may have been thinking the way we were thinking, is that, okay, the guys at the hospital, you guys probably already did all of this, you probably know what you're talking about, you are probably already diagnosed, you probably did all of this, and you're saying that based on your medical diagnosis, that you can't do anything for this individual other than send him to jail. And that's what the medical staff basically are saying by their action. By their actions, they're saying that yes, this individual with a psychotic episode came in, he was brought in on a welfare check, and he pulled somebody's hair, and we didn't know what else to do but call the police. And if that is true, then that's a shame. Okay, that's a shame. Anyway, he's taken to jail in a windowless room where he was alone and naked with nearly no human contact and no medical or mental health treatment, according to federal civil rights complaint filed Wednesday. Again, what is the moral of my story here? My rant again. The moral of my story is it's so important for us to be aware of what should happen, to be able to know who to call when things don't go the way they should go, and for us to be an advocate for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for people around us. So as I look at this here, so when we talk about who's at fault, because the topic, the name of the article is, did the jail system fail him? I would say that several people failed him, starting with the hospital. The only person or people who did anything right was the people who went out and did the mental health check. Okay, they did the mental health check. I'm saying they, I don't know it was who, one or two people. Somebody went out and did a mental health check or a welfare check and was concerned enough to bring him to the hospital. That person or group of individuals did the right thing. Everyone else, as far as I'm concerned, should also be sued as well. Because if you bring a psychotic person into the hospital should know what to do, right? They should know what to do. The police should not be called. But see, this is a problem, and I can say this in my profession. I see it all the time. And I say this to some of my colleagues: if you are not comfortable in working with individuals with severe and persistent mental illnesses, then do something else, right? Then do something else, because you can wind up being more harm than good, okay? Because people with severe and persistent mental illnesses need help, they need support just as much as anybody else, maybe with another type of illness, right? So that's important. So again, he went and I want to point it out because he was at the hospital. This guy was at the hospital. The hospital took him into the hospital. They admitted him there, and then because of his behavior, they called the police, right? They didn't think to medicate. They didn't think to admit. They didn't think to call in another clinician or mental health person to kind of evaluate. The first thing they did was call the police. And unfortunately, that's what happens. That's the first thing people think about doing, is calling the police. And when they called the police, I'm sure they admitted, hey, this guy's violent, this guy pulled this person's hair, and you got to get him out of here. So now the police come in with a certain perception. Okay, like I said, he's at the hospital. The police is probably thinking these people know what they're doing. So hey, buddy, let's go. So they took him straight to a cell, in a holding cell. Okay, he was booked into jail. And he was, like I said, never photographed, never fingerprinted, asked any medical conditions. And I'm assuming that the reason why they didn't ask any medical conditions, it could be because of the state, but why they never asked him, never fingerprint, photographed, or asked any medical questions, because they assumed that they had picked him up from the hospital, and that the people at the hospital assumed knew what they were doing. So, but here's the thing. So for 20 days, Jackson County officials kept him in a windowless room where he was alone and naked with nearly no human contact and no medical or mental health treatment. Now, again, I like to be devil's advocate and try to be fair here. Many times that is unfortunately what happens. So this is not just Mclemore. This is what happens to a lot of people, because again, it's about a safety thing. The jails don't have a lot of staff to do like if he was in a psych ward or an inpatient facility, he may have one-on-one, but somebody's actually watching him. A lot of times in these inpatient facilities, the jails, they don't have that. They don't have people trained. They got one or two or a few guards, correctional officers. So for safety reasons, they do take a person's clothes and things of that nature. All right, so he had no human contact, no medical or mental health treatment. Not sure why there was no medical or mental health treatment. The article doesn't say what his behavior was. But, well, no, actually it does. Let me go on. So, because it says, while in custody, Mclemore rarely slept, ate, or drank. So, 20 days, somebody was watching this guy, maybe not 24/7, but you're watching this guy who didn't sleep, eat, or drink. Okay? He would behave erratically, destroying dinner bags dropped off for him and dumping food on his cell floor. Again, the correctional officers may have thought that was just a behavior. You have inmates sometimes act out. I don't know. Drinks would often end up on the floor, mixed with food, trash, his feces, and urine. On August 10, 2021, after losing 45 pounds, this guy lost 45 pounds, okay? From what had been his 198-pound body, he was declared dead. The cause of death, per the autopsy, was multiple organ failure due to refusal to eat or drink with altered mental status due to untreated schizophrenia. Now let's take a look at this. Multiple organ failure due to refusal to eat or drink with altered mental status due to untreated schizophrenia. I'm going to read this again. Per the autopsy, was multiple organ failure due to refusal to eat or drink with altered mental status due to untreated schizophrenia. When Mclemore was admitted, or when person went out, whoever went out to do the health and welfare check, they took him to the hospital. He already had altered mental status. We already knew his mental status was altered. When he pulled or yanked that nurse's hair, he had altered mental status. So we knew, people here already knew that this gentleman had schizophrenia, had a mental illness, because they picked him up from the hospital. The hospital already knew. The hospital knew he had an altered mental status, but instead of treating him, they called the police instead because of an incident. They called the police instead because of an incident, that happens all the time, okay? Individuals who are psychotic, who are out of touch with reality, many times do things. They do erratic things, right? They kick you, they may pull somebody's hair, they may, knock over their tray. They do all types of things. They do it because of their altered mental status. They do it because of the psychosis. They're out of touch with reality. They do it many times because they're afraid. Okay? But the cause of death, and I'm sorry, I'm stuck here, was multiple organ failure due to refusal to eat or drink. A refusal to eat or drink. The fact that he was refusing to eat or drink further confirmed the fact that he had an altered mental status. So why would you have an individual who you admitted into the jail that showed up at your hospital or wherever this was, okay, with an altered mental state, continue to eat or drink? With an altered mental status, he didn't have the wherewithal to decide whether he should have to eat or drink. Someone should have been called. A mental health, a psychiatrist, someone should have been called to do an admission into a psych ward for him. Because the fact he was here 20 days, nothing says that he was even charged with anything. So essentially, he wasn't even charged with anything. He was, well, maybe they charged him, maybe because he pulled the girls' hair or the nurses' hair. But this guy wasn't even charged with anything. So a person that wasn't charged with anything, he went to a hospital that failed him, or a clinic that failed him, medical staff that failed him, and instead of providing treatment, they called the police. The police, following their protocol, he was admitted, he was booked into jail because he had an altered mental status, which is why he was by himself. He was by himself in a padded cell because they knew when they admitted him he had an altered mental status. So why would you have someone? You had three people or 3 stops here. The people who brought him in because he had an altered mental status. He was at the hospital. He had an altered mental status. The jail admitted him knowing he had an altered mental status. So why was this individual allowed to not eat or drink, to refuse to eat or drink, knowing that he had altered mental status? If he has an altered mental status, he lacks the ability to decide whether what's good or good for him at the moment. Why was no one called? Okay, that's where I'm going with that. So let me go through here. Now, corrections experts say claims of medical neglect and mistreatment of people with mental illnesses are a problem endemic to the U.S. penal system, which was never intended or equipped to deal with them. And that is correct. This gentleman, Mclemore, Joshua Mclemore, should have never been taken to jail. He should have never been taken to jail. Okay? He should have gotten help wherever that medical facility was. And I hope they're also named in the lawsuit. But corrections experts say claims of medical neglect and mistreatment of people with mental illness are a problem endemic to the U.S. penal system, which was never intended or equipped to deal with them. So let's be clear. The jail was never intended for people with mental illness. The police, they were never trained. They were not trained, but that was never the purpose of the police force, okay? But unfortunately, because of failures, that's where we are. What failures? The medical team failed. Where was his therapist, if he had one? Where was the outpatient mental health team, if he had one? Where the crisis team? I mean, there are so many people. And I'm not just talking about this article. I'm kind of broadening out. When we look at trying to place blame, let's make sure we place blame on everyone that's involved. We're looking at our politicians. As I said before, the medical staff, in this case, sometimes in other cases, sometimes it could be family members. It doesn't look like that here because the mom was concerned and she called, but sometimes it's family members. We all have to be involved. When we talk about this article here, again, I'm reading it, make sure I get it right. A man with mental illness died after 20 days in solitary confinement. Did the jail system fail him? Not just the jail system, did we fail him? Did Americans fail him? Did our system fail him? Did our system of only worrying about something or becoming outraged about something unless it gets, we don't care unless it gets in the news. We don't care unless someone dies. Okay? Joshua Mclemore, he died. His parents, his family will grieve him, and then we'll go on until the next case comes about. Right? But what are we doing about it now? So each time when you start calling for jail reform, police reform, make sure you look in the mirror and start calling for reform for yourself. Okay? Everyone should be educated on mental illness, especially severe and persistent mental illness. Everyone should know the number to their crisis team or how to get the number to their crisis team if there is one in their area. If you have a loved one or a family member or a friend who that you know has a severe and persistent mental illness, you should know the name of their therapist, you should know the medications they're taking, you should know the crisis team, the crisis plan. You know, there's things that you should know. The police should be the last people you call, right? You shouldn't have to call a stranger. And again, I'm talking about family members. You shouldn't have to call a stranger to deal with your loved one who has a severe and persistent mental illness, who has a psychotic episode, especially if that person lives with you or you see that person all the time. Because relapse doesn't happen overnight, right? Relapse is a gradual process, okay? So let me keep reading here, because I can go on and on about this. But I'm stuck with the cause of death. Per the autopsy was a multiple organ failure due to refusal to eat or drink with altered mental status due to untreated schizophrenia. So due to his untreated schizophrenia, he didn't eat or drink, and as a result of not eating or drinking for 20 days, and it could have been more. He was actually in solitary confinement. He was in jail for 20 days. Who knows what he was doing before he got picked up. Multiple organ failure. Okay, let me go ahead and read this. In 44 states, a jail or prison holds more people with a mental illness than the largest remaining state psychiatric hospital, according to the Treatment Advocacy Center, a nonprofit that aims to eliminate barriers to treatment for people with severe mental illness. Treatment Advocacy Center. If you've never heard of it, definitely look it up. Treatment Advocacy Center, especially if you are an individual who cares about living with or know someone with a severe and persistent mental illness. Okay? I'm reading the article. Those with psychiatric health conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are 10 times more likely to be in jail or prison than in a hospital bed. Those with psychiatric health conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are 10 times more likely to be in a jail or prison than in a hospital bed. Many times individuals who are living with schizophrenia and bipolar who are not taking their medications, because again, as we talked about before, having a mental illness, a severe and persistent mental illness, schizophrenia or bipolar, as long as you're taking care of yourself just like you would with any other illness. Schizophrenia, bipolar, we're talking about medical illnesses that can be treated. And as long as people are taking their medications, they're in treatment, they're taking care of themselves, they're fine. What we're looking at here are people who are not taking their medications, people who are untreated or poorly treated illnesses. And what happens is when a person is untreated or poorly treated, when you have bipolar or schizophrenia, they tend to be psychotic, right? And as I said, psychotic means out of touch with reality. And when a person is out of touch with reality, you may see more delusions, you may see more hallucinations, right? Which we call more positive symptoms. So when you have those symptoms and they interact with the public tends to become nervous, they become afraid, they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. So more often than not, they call the police. And when they call the police, the police, because they don't have no place to take them, there are no beds, the hospitals are not admitting, they're turning people away, right? So there's no place to take them but to jail. So now they're in jail. Where, okay, let me read this. Researchers found that people with serious mental health conditions were more likely to be victims of violence than to be violent themselves. And that is true. Okay? So in this case, Joshua was a victim of violence. He was a victim of violence. He was a victim of our failure. Not just the jail system, but the United States, our system failure, our mental health failure. Okay? It says in this case, the Indiana jail at the center of the lawsuit has seen other deaths linked to a lack of medical care. So this is not the only one. In one case, 4 days prior to Mclemore's arrival at Jackson County Jail, pretrial detainee died as a result of same practices. Okay, so it looks like this particular jail actually has a problem with this. Okay. And the article closes out and says, when a jail takes custody of a person, that person becomes 100% dependent on the people who are confining them, who hold the keys to the jail cell to make sure their basic needs are met. And this is what the attorney is saying. Okay. And again, I am just reading through this. And it says here, no single person committed an act or omission that constituted a crime. We're talking about at the jail. They're saying he most likely died due to a prolonged lack of attention by the staff. Okay. And it just goes on. You can read it. But it says here, Josh suffered and died because of multiple failures by county staff and supervisors, as well as systemic deficiencies and unconstitutional custom practice conditions at the Jackson County Jail. This is from his lawyer. And again, the only thing I would add, that he died as a result of failure starting with the hospital, okay? Starting with the hospital, okay? So it's not just the jail system that failed him. So many other people did. Okay, and I'm just reading through this. Okay, because this is a complaint. And it also says here, in fact, the county's jail nurse appeared to ignore his screams and barely interacted with him. Okay, so again, you can read it. Basically, it looks like a lot of things that just went wrong for this young man. Yeah, and in the article you can read it. It just goes from bad to worse. It's just a reason why individuals with severe and persistent mental illnesses should not be admitted into a jail. It just highlights the fact that people with severe and persistent mental illnesses need help. It highlights the fact that we cannot just rely on the jail system or the police system, both systems who were never designed to handle individuals with severe and persistent mental illnesses, to take on that role by themselves. We all have to be concerned. Family members, friends, politicians, hospital staff, everyone who has, who cares, I should say. And even if you don't, we need to have policies in place that make a difference. So I'm kind of just reading through this. It looks like, you can read the article. The article is is a sad one. So he was restrained and everything, okay? This is just kind of a really sad thing, that this young man was taken from the hospital where he should have gotten help, where he should have gotten support, but the hospital staff, because of an incident and because of their failure, thought the best thing to do was call the police. This gentleman was taken from the hospital where he should have gotten help. He was admitted into the jail, booked. They said booked, but there was no crime. His only crime was that he had a severe and persistent mental illness, and he was surrounded by people who failed to help, people who should have helped, who could have helped, and who could have done better and didn't. So I would encourage you, as you're listening to me, say, well, what can I do? I think it's important for you to get as much information as you can. At It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, we teach a mental health first aid class, which is kind of a good class, but it's not the end all or be all, okay? It's not the end all be all, because it doesn't necessarily focus on individuals with severe and persistent mental illnesses, but it's a start, okay? It's a good start. And I think it's so important, though, that you do what you can. Educate yourself. Find out, get research. You can go on our website, igbattmho.org, and look at some of the information that we have. You can go to the Treatment Advocacy Center. Go into their website. They have a whole host of information. Their website is just specifically dedicated to individuals and family members who are living with a severe and persistent mental illness. So again, this is our sister A. Legree, or Netta Legree, with another rant. I think the last time I was on here, I ranted, but I think it's so sad when we have individuals who are dying or being killed murdered because they have a severe and persistent mental illness. We are spending money, we, the United States, spending money on everything else. We're spending money on all other, all these nice mental health programs, and which is great, but the money for the severe and persistent mental illnesses, well, individuals with severe and persistent mental illness,